Hey everyone, Temporal here, and for this session, we are talking group stages. Activision Blizzard's Collegiate tournament has just finished up its Swiss stage, where it had 8 rounds in the West and 8 rounds of the East, and the top 32 teams from each region are now intermixing into 8 different groups. In the 8 different groups that you now see on your screen, there are going to be 2 teams coming out of each of the 8 groups of 8. So we're going to take a look at these groups. We're going to see, is there a death group? Hint, yes, there is. Is there a group that's maybe a little bit soft? Are there groups where Big 5 players aren't acting, where Big 8 players aren't acting, that, maybe have 2 spots up for grabs? Let's take a look and see what we have. And the place that we're going to start is Group 1, which is undoubtedly the death group. When we look at this, we see Harrisburg. Harrisburg is the only top 5 team or even top 8 team in this group. They will be getting the first slot, barring any unbelievable surprise coming through here. But things do get tough after that because there's not a clear number 2. Lord's absolutely good. In fact, let's go ahead and pull up our power rankings that we did just yesterday. We did power rankings, and we can see Lords was at the top of the making moves tier, looked pretty good. We can see our top 5 up here, top 8, that sort of thing. So Lords pretty good. But if we took a look, we can see that there's more pretty good teams in here too. We can see that the Converse Valkyries are actually in a tier above that, and the UCF Knights are in play as well. So that's 3 teams potentially that are battling out for that second slot. So let's click back over here, show what our power rankings were, and if we're looking at that, we're going to see a case of Converse right over here in our power rankings, and honestly, Converse may be better. I'd have argued at the end of last season, Converse might have been like the 9th or 10th best team. They may still be that good. They haven't lost to anyone that says they're significantly worse, but Boise's looks pretty good this season. We've got Lords, who was just a hair behind Converse there, so that's scary. Then we've also got UCF Knights. If we look at the UCF Knights, they're maybe a little bit more vulnerable in terms of what's propping them up, in terms of what's propping up each of these 3 schools. Lords has a win over Northeastern, a win over the UCF Knights, and then losses to Bay State, Northwood, and Harrisburg. So they could get their chance to get revenge against Harrisburg here. I just don't really think that one is going to happen. That one would be a strength differential. The UCF Knights beat Penn State. I've heard on the rumor mill that maybe Penn State had their manager in for that match, but they got it regardless. And then they lost to Lords, so here's their rematch chance here. Are they close? If UCF Knights beat a real Penn State, they could very well be in Lords territory at power levels. We'll have to see. And then Converse, as we've talked about, Converse in good shape. They beat Kensaw. They also beat the UCF Knights. They beat, and then they lost to Northwood and Harrisburg. So their only losses, again, to top 5 teams there, no big deal. Looks like UCF Knights are the team that are probably on the outside looking in terms of power here. So we look at this. Lords, absolutely solid. Converse, absolutely solid. And then UCF Knights are a maybe. And then things get a little bit dicey. I mean, do we really want to count out Tamu Maroon? I don't think Tamu Maroon is at the level of Converse and Lords, but if we look at Tamu's losses, they're to University of Texas, Dallas, and Boise. And sure, if we think about Boise, maybe Boise is at the same level as, hey, we could talk about they could be at the same level as like Converse, that sort of thing. So maybe Converse also beats them. I think they probably do. Tamu Maroon is also a somewhat new school to the mix in terms of they haven't really shown up in top 32s, top 16s, anything like that in previous seasons. So my hunch is, unless they really went heavy in it, decided actively to go get a bunch of good players, that they're sort of more benefiting from only 8 rounds of Swiss. They didn't have, rather than 10, which we've had in previous seasons, they didn't have time to run into better schools there. But it's hard to absolutely know for sure. So maybe we put them in the, hey, we can't quite write them off category either. OTSU, they're okay. OTSU are okay. They got second in a group in NACE last season. They didn't compete in ABC last season, and then I don't even know if I have ratings on them here because I think they're just outside. Yeah, they're a little outside of the category that I care about, but they've had some ability to show up. They, had a little bit of a mix. I'd actually call them to be at a similar level to University of Toronto Blue, who made top 32 last season. So suddenly we're looking at this and we're looking at this first group, and Harrisburg will get a slot, and then it is very likely that that next slot would go to Lords, Converse, or maybe UCF Knights. But if UCF Knights are in the conversation, maybe that puts TAMU Maroon, OTSU, and University of Toronto Blue in the conversation for that second slot too. I don't really think they are. I think Converse and Lords are just going to shut down challengers outside of each other. I don't know exactly which way that would go. If I had to bet, I'd probably put like 55-45 in Converse's favor, something along those lines. But this is a close one, and this is certainly a tough group. So this is undoubtedly the death group. We've definitely got, 3 schools fighting for 2 slots for sure, but really we could even argue that there's maybe 7 schools fighting for 2 slots, at least 3 fighting for 2 slots there. Okay, so that's like the first way that we wanted to look at this. None of the other groups are as disputed as this group is. So let's go ahead and think about the second way to analyze these groups. And I'd say the second way to analyze these groups is to look at where the Big 8 are. So Harrisburg, that's one of our Big 8. Bay State, that's one of the top 8. Redbirds, top 8. SCAD, probably in that 8th slot. UCI, they're in that 6th slot, not as high as those top 5. The top 5 are, I would say, tougher than the top 8 right now, but really the top 8 are pretty solid. Maybe SCAD's a little bit vulnerable in that 8th slot, but ultimately these top 8, I pretty much expect to be able to just decide that they want the top spot, or if there's 2 of them in a group, the top 2 spots. So we've got 5 of ours, and then we need to go find University of Texas, Dallas, and Northwood. And that should be, we're missing what? Who are we missing? We need to get our last one. We've got Harrisburg, Bay State, ISU, Maryville. Where did Maryville get off? And Maryville. Okay. So when we look at it like this, we see another analysis, and from that other analysis, we're going to see 2 important things. Our top 8 teams are divided up between 7, not 8 groups, if we look at what we expect are really the top 8 teams. So that means we have a group that is empty, does not have any of the top 8, which, hey, that's something that we care about. But it also means that we have a group that is pretty much on lock. We can look at this. This group is on lock. We know what's going to happen here. Do I want to try and draw a keyhole? It's going to be bad. It's going to be bad. It's going to be bad. Yeah, okay. So this group is pretty much on lock. We expect Northwood to get the 1 spot here, and I do expect SCAD to get the 2 slot. It probably helps that the group that has 2 of the top 8 in it does include SCAD, because again, if we look at our power rankings, SCAD is probably the most vulnerable. I'm not going to say by any means that SCAD is weak, but SCAD have a win against Ucf Orange. That's solid. That's a team from the tier below them here. Here, I'll jump over to here. SCAD, we can see, have a win. This team against UF Orange, that's solid. They've got a loss to Bay State. Okay, that makes sense. Nothing too wild there. But if we look at the other teams in the top 8, not the top 5, we see University of Texas, Dallas. They went ahead and took down Bellevue. Okay, that's solid. Not really significantly different, but hey, similar thing. And then UCI took down Boise. So they've all got a win against a team in the next tier down below there. You could really pick, hey, does it actually make a difference, or are these teams really pretty similar? Regardless, these are solid teams, and we're now in a situation where, is there anyone that could really challenge SCAD? I think Northwood's a lock for 1, but is there anyone in this group that could challenge SCAD? And the answer to that is going to be, well, let's take a look. In here, we've got UCLA Esports, solid team. We've got Grand Canyon University, new, but maybe solid. We'll do let's actually use a different color for these. We've got UCLA, solid team. They were top 32 last season. I believe they were actually top 24. We've got Grand Canyon University, new, I believe, this season, but somewhat solid. University of Washington just missed out on group stages last season, if memory serves, but they were top 32, I want to say, the season before that. They just missed out. They're back in groups here. I expect that they're still pretty good, pretty darn solid. UCal, maybe. I'm probably not quite going to mark them. So do any of these teams, UCLA, University of Washington, or GCU, have what it takes to challenge SCAD? I don't think so. I think you've got, hey, I'll be interested to see which of these teams gets third, maybe which of these teams gets fourth, but I don't actually think there's a real path through for UCLA, UW, or GCU here. Grand Canyon University, we can mark them like that. And if we look at Grand Canyon University, am I underselling them based on where I've put them in my power rankings? I might have them. Oh, I do have them ahead of UW. But this whole tier of good teams is pretty mix-upable. Honestly, we're pretty darn solid through the making moves tier. I tried to put them in order for the good teams tier, but we just don't have enough information. Okay, so we see this group. This group is really predetermined, I think. So that's interesting. We've seen this is a predetermined group. From there, we want to go ahead and go, hey, let's look at this other group. Let's look at this group right here, group 2. That does not have, that's totally a good drawing. Let's look at this group that doesn't have any of the big 8, because what this means is SCAD is going to be coming into playoffs with a bad seed, because they'll probably they won't have a top 8 seed because they will have lost in their group to Northwood, most likely. Whereas group 2, someone out of here is going to get a top 8 seed, which means they will probably avoid having to face a winner of another group, which will probably be a top 8 team, because all of the other groups have at least one top 8 player in them. So who is going to have potentially a team that is not a top 8 that they can maybe then sneak past and get into the top 8 themselves, not necessarily in power rankings, not necessarily in strength, but at least on the leaderboards in the actual playoffs. So who are the good teams in here? Well, we see Miami University. Okay, so that's Miami, Ohio, the Redhawks. Makes sense. We see Rit Orange. Okay, if we want to take a quick look at Rit Orange, where do they fall here? Well, we can see Rit Orange. They didn't actually make our top 30 here. They did in NACE make playoffs last season. This season, they seem to be a little bit weaker. I do know that I want to say my A team and my B team, 2 of my club teams, not my varsity team. My varsity team is Northeastern, of course, but I believe both my club teams played against them. I believe we've seen some other stuff play against them. Let's take a quick look at what I have for them. I probably have stuff. They went 7-1 with no real opponents is what I have in my notes. So let's take a quick look, because I should pull them up. They're here. I don't want to badmouth them undeservedly. They finished 12th in their region, which was the West region, and they did lose to University of Toronto Blue, which again is probably about a 4-1 team. Their best win over OTSU, similar level team there, and then they lost to Rutgers. Okay, so we see that one. Okay, maybe for Rit Orange, I'm going to mark that off. Mystery Machine, going to be a bit more solid. If we take a look at Mystery Machine, we're going to see that Mystery Machine certainly isn't a top-tier team, but they did beat Toronto Blue. They beat Drexel Dragons. They lost to Northeastern, Harrisburg, Northwood. You wouldn't expect them to be able to take on any of those teams. So we could maybe mark this as another team to pay attention to as well in this group, because remember, there's 2 slots up for grab in this group. We don't need to write anyone off too easily. Then we've got Penn State, and Penn State looks like another potential actual group winner, potential challenge for the top of the group here. We've got Ucf Orange. That's currently a top 13 team, I believe. Last season, top 16 team. EA UCD Gold is UC Davis, and they're about another 4K team. We'd put them similar in that Rit Orange range, I'd say. And then we have UC Santa Cruz Communal Catch-Up Bowl, which is UC Santa Cruz's second team. And if we take a quick look at them, because we've kind of got to, I mean, there's what a name with that, right? We're going to take a quick look at them. They did go 6-2. And we can see that they took a quick loss to UW Stout and to the Ottawa Braves. UW Stout, they're okay. Last season, I believe they were a 7-3 team. This season, they did make it through into here as well. Ottawa Braves, okay, fine. They don't really have any meaningful wins. They beat Stanford. They beat Overwatch U. There aren't really any meaningful wins here. There's nothing for us to go, oh, hey, we know the level of their strength. They could be 4K. They could be 4.2K. They could be 3.7K. Really don't know the strength of that team. And then Tamu White, I believe, is the weaker of the Tamu teams there. So I'm not too worried about this. So I just don't know what UC Santa Cruz's second team looks like. But looking at the rest of these, it mostly is going to look like we have 3 real teams fighting for 2 spots in this group with a couple potential challengers. Can Rit Orange punch above their weight class? I mean, maybe. You know, they did make it to playoffs in NACE last season. Mystery Machine, hey, they've been around. They know what they're doing. I wouldn't write that team off. I probably do put them down as better than... I'd probably actually put Mystery Machine as the best of the 3 outside challengers. Are 3 real teams fighting for 2 slots, and then 3 challengers, I would say, looking at this. Again, this UC Santa Cruz team, second team, I just don't know about. I don't know what's going on there. I have trouble believing that UC Santa Cruz has so many good players that they were able to go, hey, we're fielding a team. It's great. It's a top 16 level team. We lose 3 of our starters coming into this season. We can field another team. Again, it looks like a top 16 level team. And by the way, we still have enough people left over to field a club team that is like top 20, top 30 level. I have trouble believing that. So my guess is we have 3 real teams, and then we have 3 going on the outside here. And if I had to look at who's going to win this one, I would probably look at this and say UF Orange is the one to pick to win this. And the reason I'm going to say UF Orange is the one to get it, the reason I'm going to say that is UF Orange did already beat Miami, Ohio in Swiss, and they also beat Kennesaw in UCF. So they've got some good wins there. One of the 3 challengers for this is, one of the 3 going for it is Miami, Ohio, who they've already beaten. And then Penn State had that maybe weird loss earlier, but they did have that loss to UCF, who again, we saw, you know, UF beat. So if UF Orange beat a team that beat Penn State and beat Miami, Ohio, I think UF Orange for one of those slots is a pretty good lock. And then you go, hey, are there rumors of Penn State was fielding their manager when they were up against the other Florida team, the UCF? That true? And are they good? I mean, they finished better than Miami, Ohio did last season, but supposedly Miami, Ohio had roster issues last season. I would expect that the second slot, if I was a betting man, was going to go to Miami University. These 2 could flip it, and, you know, maybe Miami University gets some revenge here and they come out on top. But if I had to guess, this is going to be the one, this is going to be the 2. Penn State may just refuse to be held back, though. Penn State may train hard, may go for it, may push. And, you know, I think you'll have some interesting stuff where it'll be very curious to see what comes out on the rest of this. If I had to put these in order, I'm going 1, 2, 3, and then 4. And then I just have no idea about UCSC. Maybe they're better than we expect, but that's probably what I'd look at here. And then, you know, again, I don't know where UCS is going to fall there. Their second team, but 5, 6, I'd probably go in that order. This is an interesting group. It's really hard for me to predict exactly how this group goes, though I do think we are right that UF Orange probably comes out on top. And I think Miami, Ohio will get the second slot. I think it's a very safe pick that UF Orange will get at least one of those 2 slots. Okay, so that's interesting. We've now gone ahead and seen what we've got for our group that had 2 of the Big 8 in it. We've seen what we have for a group that doesn't have it. We could see UCF Orange finding themselves finishing top 8 because they could pull a top 16, you know, a non-actual top 8 opponent in their first round, which would be very good for them. So let's go through the rest of the groups now, because what we've really done is we've looked at Group 1, we looked at Group 2, and we looked at Group 6. So let's go through the rest of the groups and see what we see. And in this, we can pretty easily go, hey, Bay State should be a lock to take one of these, and then we've got to figure out who takes the second slot here. Is the second slot up for grabs? And if we look at the second slot, Cal's okay, OU Crimson is okay, Kennesaw is pretty good, Hawaii's okay, Grandview's okay. That's a pretty messy goat. I don't know exactly what to put for WPI goats. They're not bad, I'll say. They might be Cal level. I'll mark them here. It pains me, but I'm going to mark them here. Don't know anything about William and Mary. Okay, so I look at this. That's too many blue check marks. So can we divide this a little bit better? Can we go, hey, who's actually good here? Well, if we look at our power rankings, because, hey, we have those, we can see that, sure enough, we've put Kennesaw pretty high. We've put Kennesaw pretty high in our power rankings, and you might be going, Temporal, why is Kennesaw so high in our power rankings? They beat Rutgers, they beat UCF, they beat NYU, they beat St. Clair, they lost to UF Orange and Miami, Ohio. So they beat UCF. That should justify them being up here. On the other hand, is UCF too high because of the win over Penn State that maybe wasn't real, or they may be more vulnerable than we think? It's hard to really know for sure. That said, if I had to pick someone in this, it's probably Kennesaw as the number 2 team in here. That's probably what I'm going for. It's not perfect, but it's what we've got. Grandview would then be a solid second choice there. We obviously haven't seen these teams head off, face up against each other, but that would be a way that we could look at this. I really do think that Cal is just too far behind, so let's go ahead and erase Cal, erase University of Hawaii, erase WPI Goats, and let's mark those with a less competitive thing here, where, hey, there could be an interesting mix-up. I can't tell you exactly which team will win out of these. The 3 that I just marked, with dashes, I'd probably say it's Hawaii, but I can't swear to that. But I would say our competition for winning this group, OU Crimson, maybe. I would probably say our real competition for winning this group is, obviously Bay will win it, but for getting out of groups into the playoffs is probably Kennesaw and the Grandview Vikings. And I'm going to give the lean to Kennesaw there. But again, the UCF, how strong are they actually? Because their win over them is propping them up, makes this hard to say. Okay. So that's what we're looking at for Group 2. It's an interesting group. Group 2, it's for Group 3 rather. Group 2 was also an interesting group. Group 1 is the death group. Let's move on to Group 4. So for Group 4, what do we have? We know that we're going to have a champion in Group 4 because we've already found all the champions. In University of Texas, Dallas, assuming that they don't just absolutely choke like they did in the playoffs, the actual playoffs at the end of last season, should take this group. There's no one in this group that plays at the level of University of Texas, Dallas. But who else plays at a good level? Hey, Nuntype, yes, you are going to win this group. But who else can take this? Who else could get a spot out of this group? Well, Rutgers missed playoffs last season, but they scrim 4.4. We know a little bit about them in terms of, we don't want to put too much value on what people say they scrim, but they did beat Rit Orange. They did beat Boston. They lost to Penn State and Kennesaw. Okay, we know Rit Orange, that's about like 4-1. We know Boston is like a 4-0 team. So okay, maybe they're in play here. We also know that they at least should be better than their second team, which is the Rutgers Scarlet Squires. Rutgers Scarlet Squires is probably like a 4-1 team. It got a really good seed. It didn't play any real teams it played one real team on its way through, Northeastern, and it lost to that team, but it got a better seed than Northeastern because it didn't play any other real teams. Yeah, I'm a little salty about that one. Here, I'll pull them up because, that's a good system that we've got here. We had some funky stuff in this West-East division, I have to say. I think 64 is a lot of teams to be pushing through, and it turns out even when we've split them to like 100 to 150 in each region, we don't do amazing here. So if we look through on this, Griffin Gaming, that's kind of a team. OW1, that's kind of a team. University of Toronto, okay, they're like 4-1. So they did beat a 4-1 team. Okay, cool. I guess they can be here. I'm just salty that that's a 7-1 and I'm not going to hide it. Okay, so their main tank flamed Artsy one time and it was kind of funny. Who did? Did Rutgers? Rutgers main tank flamed Artsy? That is funny. Okay. What was I saying? So I look at this, Rutgers, that looks like a team that could do it. University of South Carolina, it's hard to call because they forfeited matches. Like, I can't tell you how good they are. Supposedly we played them in Northeastern. We didn't actually because they had to forfeit. They did we're on spring break. And I gotta say, like, if you're team isn't organized enough that you can find a way to play on spring break, even if it means laptops, even if it means, having to start one of your subs. Like, that's a knock against you in this kind of tournament because it's gonna get you losses. We did, try to reschedule with them. We just couldn't fit it, but they could be a little bit better than we think. So maybe we'll give them a knock here. University of Massachusetts is hung out just outside the playoff level for a couple seasons. Maybe they could do it. But that's all I really care about in here. Now, maybe I'm showing too much of an Eastern bias here. Maybe I should be looking at UO Esports and thinking they're a little bit better. I'm not really worried about this team. So I look at this and go, yeah, this looks like it should be a case of University of Texas Dallas easily takes the group. Rutgers may have to battle a little to get the group, but they should have to trip to mess up. They should have to either trip against their JV team, or they'd have to trip, I think, against University of Massachusetts or South Carolina. South Carolina is probably the next biggest threat. I don't know that for sure, though. Maybe their JV team is the next biggest threat. I don't think it actually is. I think we're probably more in like this range. Maybe we flip these and UMass is more scary than their JV team. But that's probably what we're looking at, where this group honestly feels a little on the weak side. UTD is plenty powerful enough, don't get me wrong, but the strength of this group feels a little bit on the weak side, if I do say so myself. Like, it's hard to call who's going to win it, but I'm not seeing a real strong second coming out of here. Rutgers is, again, Rutgers is fine, but they're not really a, hey, you should be getting second in your group strong team. Based on what we're seeing, they should be like a third or fourth strongest team in their group because they did lose to Kennesaw. They did lose to Penn State. If you're losing to Kennesaw and Penn State, I'm not convinced that you should be the second strongest team, that you should have a path through to top 16, and it kind of looks like they do. That said, they've still got to take it, and they did find a path into the playoffs, and then in group stages, weird things can happen. South Carolina's game against UCF was close now that I look at the match scores. Okay. Yeah, I do have South Carolina as my 3 team out of this group, and it would not terribly surprise me if they take down the Scarlet Knights. That said, I'm not really convinced that they should be making it in either with, a couple forfeits, things like that, where it's sort of like, okay, because you guys had forfeits, you didn't end up playing against great teams. And because you didn't end up playing against great teams, okay, have you really earned your way in here? Pandemonium? Hey, Pandemonium, what are you ing? Are you not happy that I'm saying maybe Rutgers' path is a little too easy through this group? We've got an from Pandemonium and a from Nuntype. So, I don't know. I don't know what those necessarily mean. But again, we look at this one. UTD for sure, and then we're probably looking at Rutgers, which is fine. I don't mind Rutgers making it in. I just probably have had them at more like top 32, top 24 level, not at top 16 level that they're going to get through here. And then maybe South Carolina does it instead. First 2 maps were, but after University of South Carolina fell, got it. Pandemonium is UCF. Got it. That is helpful. I recognize that name. That's on a team that I'm following. The to Rutgers is warranted. Got it. Maybe the forfeits is a strat to keep their strat secret. Could be. You could be onto something, Levy. Okay. So then we move on to Group 5, and Group 5 is going to give us, hey, we have a pretty easy, pretty obvious win for Redbirds here. Don't get me wrong. Redbirds, as we look at them, we'll just take a quick look. ISU, they beat University of Texas Dallas. They beat Boise. They beat Boulder. They beat Illinois Orange. They beat too many other teams that are worse than those. So they're good. They're looking good. They're going to win this group. But who else is in play in this group? Well, the ones who should immediately jump out are Northeastern and Bellevue. Northeastern and Bellevue are probably the ones battling it out for this group. We could go, oh, hey, what is UMD Black going to do? What are Drexel Dragons going to do? They haven't really been in play before, that sort of thing. Iowa State's looking a little better this year than they did, or this season than they did last season, but they still don't, based on what I'm seeing, look like they could be challenging a Northeastern or a Bellevue. And Boston University, like I said, is like a flat 4K team. So this is a tough call. I've how much do I want to say here? How much do I want to get into the Scrimbucks? Okay, so as we look at this one, let's first list what we know about these teams. Northeastern has both won and lost against Miami, Ohio, with the more recent win. They've beat Akron a couple times. They beat Mystery Machine. Bellevue beat University of Santa Cruz, beat Hawaii, beat UNT, lost to Boise, and University of Texas, Dallas. So as we go over here to this one, we see from our power rankings, we've got the win over University of Santa Cruz, putting Bellevue up here in a tier above Northeastern, who have the loss to Lords and the more recent win against Miami, Ohio, but a win and a loss against Miami, Ohio. Okay, so that gets interesting. So what's putting University of Santa Cruz up here? They're supported by UCSC up here. UCSC, what are they looking at? They have a win against Utah, a win against Grandview, a win against UW Stout. Well, that's not all that convincing. Like, we look at this and we see Utah, Grandview, and UW Stout would be somewhere out here in like top 40, top 50 school territory. So in theory, UC Santa Cruz, like, yes, Bellevue is better than UC Santa Cruz, but UC Santa Cruz could be this good, or they could be this good. We don't really know. There's a bit of a range there. The information is imperfect. Based on what we'd be looking at here, okay, yes, we see Bellevue is a tier above Northeastern. We'd maybe expect Bellevue to take that. I'm less convinced about that. We've scrimmed Bellevue. We scrimmed Bellevue last week before. They did have one of their starters out. It wasn't close. It took us less than a map to figure them out, and then it wasn't close. But they had a starter out. So, and people have on days, off days. That was a scrim. They could have been tired. We could have been tired. We might show up at 80% of what we did in the match. They, with their starter, might be in such a situation that they absolutely roll us. I would not count them out by any means. They're definitely somewhere in this range for the level of this team. So, hey, hard to really know here. And that's Scrimbucks. Scrimbucks don't really matter. The point that I'm getting at here is going to be one of, hey, we look at this, we can absolutely see that there's two teams that could challenge for this spot. So again, we have our one team in Redbirds. We've got our potentially 2 and 3 teams here. I'm not going to mark either of them as the 2 or the 3 team. And then we potentially have other teams, but the other teams just look too far away to really challenge because they look to be, hey, they're probably in like the 4K to 4.2 range. And that's just not really going to make Northeastern or Bellevue sweat unless they have a really bad day. Rutgers about to lose to the B team. I don't know, Aiden. I don't know. Like, you guys seem to have a path through that's a little too easy for my liking to top 16. Don't mess it up. Like, you guys have been gifted a golden opportunity. Seize the day. Seize the day and make sure you take that. Don't sleep on Iowa State and Zeb. I mean, they're not bad. I'm not going to sleep too hard on Iowa State, but if we take a quick look at Iowa, do I have them on my cheat sheet? I do. They beat CU Boulder, but I don't know if that was a forfeit or not. They lost to TAMU. They lost to Maryville. I want to say they were like 5-3. I want to say I have that. Yeah, let's pull them up real quick. Iowa State. Oh, goodness. Iowa State has had all of their scores reverted. Thank you, tournament. Thank you for being broken. So, oh no, I'm just in the wrong portion of it. Yay, game battles. Let me take a quick look at Iowa and get a quick refresher. Sorry guys, I'm usually more pulled up than this, but I can't actually track 64 teams. I track about 30 of them. I track beyond the 30 of them to get the information that I need, but I don't actually keep my wins and losses for every single team listed all the way through. So Iowa State, they lost to University of Washington. They lost to TAMU's lead team, TAMU Maroon. They lost to Maryville. Their best win? Yeah, their best win is going to be over CU Boulder, and I know CU Boulder forfeited 3 or 4 matches, so I don't know if that's real or not. And then other than that, we're looking at UCSB, we're looking at CGC, we're looking at Grand Canyon University's JV team, we're looking at Oregon State. None of those are teams that beating means anything. So we really don't know what we're looking at there. I don't want to undersell Iowa too much, but I don't really think they have what it takes to seriously threaten Northeastern or Bellevue. If Northeastern or Bellevue, like, throw in 2 subs and don't warm up? Sure, absolutely. Iowa could come in and slap them around, but I don't think Iowa's going to have what it takes to really take down those teams on a good day. We be scrimming hard. Good, Aiden. Good. Make sure Rutgers gets through. Take this chance. Finish top 16, and then promote the bejesus out of the fact that you finished top 16 to go recruit more students. That's the way. Okay. Next, we move on to Group 6, which we already covered. This is the group that we have SCAD coming out in the 2 spot. We'll have Northwood coming out in the next spot. Maybe we could have a challenge from University of Washington, Grand Canyon, or UCLA, but probably not. SCAD, I don't expect to slip up there. If they did, any of these teams could, in theory, do it, but SCAD would have to mess up uncharacteristically. So then we move on to Group 7. And then as we head into Group 7, we've got Maryville, who should be able to win this group without too much trouble. And then we've got UC Santa Cruz. And UC Santa Cruz probably takes this. Now, we did talk a little bit earlier about how UC Santa Cruz doesn't have the most support in the world for their spot. Their spot could be here, where it is, or maybe it's down here. It could be anywhere in this range. It's somewhere behind Bellevue, unless it was just a bad day and on a different day they'd be better than Bellevue. But it's somewhere between, this range. So maybe they're not a lock for second place. Maybe we look at that and go, hey, they're vulnerable. Maybe a team can take them down. But honestly, which team? Which team in Group 7 is going to take them down? Again, we've got Maryville in the 1 spot here. We've got UC Santa Cruz in the 2 spot here. UCSD looks good this season. They could maybe do it. UNT, I don't know what's going on with them. If we look at UNT, they had a lot of losses that I don't think were forfeits in NACE, because NACE kicks teams out if they forfeit more than twice, but they're bad losses that they shouldn't have taken. But then if we look at how they did in ABC, they're in better shape. They don't have super meaningful wins, but they're certainly beating teams that are better than some of the teams they lost to in NACE. So they beat UA Crimson, they beat UC Rolled. UC Riverside is not as good this season as last season. They lost to Bellevue, they lost to Grand Canyon. Losing to Grand Canyon hurts them quite a bit. If they lost to Grand Canyon, can they beat Santa Cruz? I don't think they can, because Santa Cruz was happy to beat up on Grandview, on Utah, that sort of thing. So I don't really think they could do it, but we'll go ahead and give them a mark for a maybe type thing. York Lions, probably not going to be able to do that. Overwatch 1, probably not going to be able to do that. I mean, these are sort of real teams, but these are sort of real teams, I would even argue, at like a lower tier than UNT and UCSD. So I'd say this probably goes to UCSC. If someone surprises me, I'd expect it to be UCSD, maybe it being UNT. So this isn't a locked group by any means, but I think we have a pretty strong feel. Maryville will win the group, and I think we have a pretty strong feel that this is going to be UC Santa Cruz unless they flinch, unless they mess up. If I was UC Santa Cruz, I would be prepping for these two teams right here, UNT and UCSD. Group 8, also kind of death group. Hard to pick two to come out of that one. Let's take a look. Oh, is that what's going on? The UNT Dallas team in NACE is not the same as UNT Esports? That would explain it. So they did one of those things like ISU did last season where they put different people in there. Okay. I appreciate that, Alec. It's hard to tell that thing because NACE is having players use their first names rather than their battle tags, where everyone else they're using their battle tags. Thank you for that clarification. So maybe UNT, is a little stronger than we're thinking. I still don't think that totally does it for us. Let me actually see where UNT got its loss then, because I have a loss listed that maybe I shouldn't have listed. Let's see what their two ABC losses are. Their two ABC losses, no. They have a loss to Grand Canyon University and Bellevue. And if we look at Grand Canyon University, we do have a feel for Grand Canyon University is somewhere in this tier. And we do know that UC Santa Cruz is better than this, quite frankly. So they're going to be somewhere in this range. Maybe they're close. Maybe UNT actually belongs up here in this range and they're just behind Excuse me, did I say Grand Canyon or Grandview? No, Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon is down over here. So, I don't think so. We could look at Grand Canyon. We can say, oh, hey, what are Grand Canyon's losses to? Did they just lose to really, really good schools and we're underrating them? Well, they lost to Boise, they lost to UTD, they lost to UCLA, and they lost to Maryville. If they lost to UCLA, no. If they lost to UCLA, I can pretty confidently say that this season Santa Cruz is better than them. That's going to be facts. We saw at the beginning of the season, sort of between seasons, we saw a California Cup, and coming out of California, we do know, now it's been a few months since then, but we do know that with sort of this season's rosters, we should have had a situation where Irvine is the best school in California for Overwatch. Santa Cruz is the second best school in California for Overwatch. UCLA can try their heart out, but I don't think they're at that Santa Cruz level, which is ultimately what we're planning around here. But thank you for that information. Check the match page and it shows the battle tags. Got it. Thank you, Alec. Okay, so we have that. That's going to bring us back to here. And now we are moving into Group 8. And what are we looking at in Group 8? And Group 8 gets a little bit messy. We have potentially a little bit of a death group again, but I don't quite think it lives up to that. So we look at this, and UCI should be able to win this. UCI, if memory serves, already beat Boise. Let me double check that. But I actually feel pretty strongly that these two have taken this group and this is pretty locked. I don't really consider this a death group because I actually consider this pretty locked for both of these slots. So let me take a look at my notes real quickly, and we see that UCI did beat Boise. They beat them in NACE, if memory serves. They're both in the West Division. They also beat Illinois Orange, UCLA, UW Stout. Their losses to Maryville. And Boise beat Bellevue, beat Grand Canyon, beat the TAMU team, beat UCSD, lost to UCI and Redbirds. So I take a quick look at this one, and I don't really think that we're looking at a lot of vulnerability here. In terms of other schools that maybe could be threatening, well, last season Illinois Orange finished top 16. Last season we'd be looking at Illinois Orange and saying, hey, that's a threat. But we just talked about the fact that UCI already took them down, and we're also going to see that Illinois Orange's best win this season is, oh, hey, they beat UW Stout and CU Boulder. They lost to Redbirds and UCI, no shame there, but they also lost to Pizza Pirates and UCSD. So if they lost to Minnesota Pizza Pirates and UCSD, I don't buy that they're challenging Boise. They've already lost to UCI. I don't buy that they're challenging Boise. Now, they did lose pretty early in the season, if memory serves, to the Pizza Pirates. UCSD would have been more recent, but I don't buy that that team is going to go ahead and be able to challenge that. So probably not them. I think they're one of the better teams outside, so I'll give them an up check mark in this. And that leaves Utah. And, you know, Utah was great last season, but if we look at Utah's matchup so far, they beat Rebel Gaming. They beat Davis. Davis is like a 4K team. Rebel Gaming was like 7-3 last season. Made playoffs here, but you know, our expanded playoffs type thing. They lost to UC Santa Cruz and to Grandview. And, you know, maybe Grandview's better than we think, but I don't think so. I would probably look at this and go, maybe one of these two teams could challenge. I think last season, this could have qualified as a death group. I don't think these two teams keep up with Boise this season. I think Boise is stronger this season. Utah and Illinois Orange both look to be weaker this season. Ultraviolets, solid enough, but they're not going to keep up with the likes of Illinois Orange and Utah. Rebel Gaming, pretty much the same thing, I'd say there. So I look at that. I think this is actually a pretty locked group. Maybe Utah will go, no, we're going to scrim hard at the end of the season. Them and Irvine have a bit of a habit of doing that, going hard, going into the end of the season, sort of showing up better for group stage for playoffs than they did for the rest of the season. That this season, UCI has been pretty serious all season. But I look at that, maybe a very good version of Utah will show up that was better than they were in Swiss play. But based on what I see here, I think we know what happens in Group 8. So I'm not going to give this one the title of death group. I don't think this is a second death group. I think this is a locked group. I think we look at this, and this is going to be our death group, Group 1 over here. I think we're going to go, hey, this is maybe our softest group right here because that second spot is a little too cheap to get, in my opinion. This one obviously is a locked group, so we can draw our lock again because that was just so beautiful, and I know you guys want to see me draw a lock again. That's definitely what you're here for. So there's our locked group. And everything else is just pretty much a standard group. They all look pretty reasonable, pretty similar to me. Like, I look at this, Group 8, the two teams are almost sort of locked. I don't know that I consider that a better or a worse group than, say, Group 5, where 3 teams are fighting for 2 spots and we don't know which is the second. I guess I'd consider Group 5 a little bit of a better group, more competitive group in that sense, but it's not like Illinois and Orange and Utah are bad teams. They're just, don't seem to be quite as good. I think Boise is going to go, hey, maybe they're the 9th, 10th, 11th best team this season. We'll have to see. Yeah. So overall, I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed with the East-West split. I had hoped this would work out better. I think we saw some interesting things where some of the reason that we have a death group and that we have a soft group is even though we only had like 150 teams in one or maybe 150 teams in each, I think we had like 250 teams total this season between the two groups, it doesn't actually feel like 8 Swiss rounds did a particularly good job of dividing them up. And what I mean by that is I will go ahead and jump over to our game battles pages here. And we can see that, oh, that's not the one I wanted. That's the one I wanted. We can see that it just wasn't enough rounds. Like, we tried, but it turns out that I'm not sure we could afford to give up a weekend of rounds. Really, we needed 1 more seeded round, not 2 more unseeded rounds. They do the thing where they only reseed every second round, and we needed like 1 more seeded round effectively because it should have helped. It should have split the teams. But if I look at last season in terms of the seeding that was broken, SCAD was seeded way too low, and then maybe we had 2 teams. Maybe it was only actually 1 team because the University of Toronto has got their way back in here, but maybe we had 2 teams that, played the game a little bit. So, like, I'd say the top 20 teams outside of SCAD were pretty close to accurate last season coming out of our Swiss play. Looking at our Swiss play here, I can look at this first, and we had this weird thing where Ucf Orange is a 6-0 team going into the last round, didn't pull any 6-0 opponents. They reached down for both of their opponents. That was weird. We had a little bit of that last season where Northeastern, I want to say Northeastern when they were 4-0, maybe when they were 6-0, or no, they were like 5-1, I want to say, pulled up and got themselves a 6-0 opponent. Like, there's always going to be a little bit of that, but it was weird that Ucf Orange got two teams that both had losses, 2 5-1 teams instead of a 6-0 team. It was weird that the Scarlet Squires got through here and got themselves a 7th place seed coming out of their group when, okay, 4-1, 4-ish, maybe 4-1. Like, okay, if you're not having to beat like a 4.2, how do I put this? This isn't Scarlet Squire's fault, but like, and there's other teams that this happened to. They're just rated particularly highly in our seeding here. If you did this without beating a 4-3 team, that's kind of silly. And I think we all sort of recognize that. And then we have this situation where Lords, and we'll scroll down to Lords is breaking their group and created the death group. And how did Lords break their group and create the death group? Well, they were one of the teams that had to play up. They had to play up against a team that had a better record than them in one of their rounds. They have 3 losses in 8 rounds to Northwood, Harrisburg, and Bay State. Well, Northwood, Harrisburg, and Bay State, let's take a quick look at that. Wait a second, those are the top 3 teams in this region. That doesn't really work. So, like, we needed an extra seeded round here to avoid some of this nonsense. But that's fine. We live and learn. We clearly there's something that's a little funky with the reseeding that's going on here that, maybe doesn't make sense. Similar stuff here where, hey, look at this. We're looking at Rit Orange. Rit Orange has themselves a 12 seed. That's a pretty good seed, a 12 seed coming out of here. And we're going to see, who did Rit Orange beat? University of Toronto Blue, OTSU. those are like 4-1 teams, maybe. This is, again, one of these situations where, hey, that's a pretty strong seed that we're looking at to get the 12 spot in here. So really struggled. I think the idea of, hey, let's split them up. We ended up with 110 after teams had dropped out in this region. And what did we end up with in West? 100. Okay, so we had a lot of teams drop out, but we had about 100 in each region at the end there. So, hey, it helped. That was nice. That was interesting. It was good to see what happened when they split like this. I don't know if they'll split like this again. You guys will have to let them know yourselves. They did reach out to people. They hosted stuff at the, they being Activision Blizzard, hosted sort of a user group, effectively meetings that people could tune into, that people could go join and share their thoughts. And I thought the split would be cool. I expected them to split for a few rounds of Swiss and then maybe mix things together. They didn't end up doing it that way. They did less rounds of Swiss and then put them together for a giant group stage. I don't think that quite worked, but let me know, guys. Do you agree, disagree? Do you go, hey, no, I think this split worked wonderfully? Or do you think, no, they needed to reseed every single match? Or what do you think is going on here? Just not allow reschedules and reseed for every single match? Or was this a great path that they went through? And am I wild? Am I totally off base? Is this actually a death group that we're looking at over here in Group 8? Definitely yell at me in the comments, throw it up in chat. Or have I picked the wrong team to win? Are the Scarlet Squires going to absolutely kick the Rutgers Knights' butt and they're going to get the second slot in here? Or am I sleeping on Rit Orange and they're actually really good and they're going to be taking down Penn State and Ucf Orange? Or, hey, you don't know anything about the University of Santa Cruz Communal Ketchup Bowl and they're actually for sure going to lock in this second slot. Definitely let me know, guys. Power rankings, group ratings, thinking about the teams. This stuff is meant to be fought over. But for now, I think that's going to do it. And yeah, drop a like, consider subscribing if you haven't done so, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks. Temporal out.